great to be back. So this talk is going to be on common arguments against it, answering common evolutionist arguments. And I know that a lot of us have been engaged in this for a long time. We have our own favorites that we've heard from different people. In fact, creation.com, CMI recently came out with their own list of common arguments. So these are the ones that I've heard the most, and I thought, well, I'll try to share with you how I respond to them, and I'm hoping that this will be helpful for you. I try to take a kind of a more simple approach. When you're debating with somebody, inundating them with, Poisson distributions and things like that usually isn't that effective. So let's see here. So Bill, it looks like the thing is not switching.
We need to put the receiver in.
Is that? Oh, gotcha. That might help. Okay, let's see here. Does it need to sync up?
Fred, we had to make this hard for you.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Okay, so as Bill mentioned, I'm a co-host of Real Science Radio. It was a lot of fun when we did that little promo there over at Red Rocks. So, the radio show has been a lot of fun. It's going really well. I really think some of these big creation groups should hire Bob as a consultant, as an SEO, that's a search engine optimization expert, because he is great at that. In fact, I think what Big Bang Evidence is like not only on the first page, but number one. There's a lot of things you can search for, and Bob's site comes up, and I'm telling you, it's great, because even for this presentation, there's so much great material, and I want to thank Bob for that. I mean, they're really concise lists of things, and you'll see a lot of that tonight. It really is great. It's a great, great, great resource. So I wanted to mention this. This is something else I'm going to have to give Bob credit for. He told me this a while back, and I thought, this is really cool. I told it to my son today. And he's like, that's really interesting. Now, this is speculation, but it's a pretty well thought out speculation, in my opinion. Today's Friday the 13th, right? Well, I think it's fun to speculate that, did the fall of man occur on the very first Friday the 13th? What does 13 mean in the Bible? I mean, God loves symbolism, right? Numbers mean things. We know that 13, we get really good clues that it means man's rebellion. For example, 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. Ishmael is associated with the number 13, and I think most of us know where the history of that goes. Solomon was 7 years in building God's temple, but he took 13 years to build his own house. So 13 is associated with rebellion. So let's consider this. Now, Jonathan Sephardi wrote this in Creation Magazine, I think in 2011 edition, and this is something, actually Bob has shared this with me before then, but it was really neat how Sarfati really kind of agrees with these same concepts. I think a lot of us would. Adam and Eve did not conceive any children prior to the fall. I think we'd all agree with that as Christians, right? Eve would likely have become pregnant during her first menstrual cycle. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Lucifer also would have rebelled in the short time between creation and the fall, and that's biblically supported. So, let's consider this. God, very orderly. We know that God is really orderly. And if you consider the gestation cycle, you've got, if God started the gestation cycle on day one, this is where Adam and Eve were created. And so if her gestation cycle was created then, her egg would be released on day 14. So the fall would have had to have been between 6 and 13. So it seems like the most logical place where this would have happened when man rebelled is Friday the 13th. So kind of a, don't know for sure, but it's a neat thought. Well, this has been in the news a lot, right? Fake news. Yeah, I didn't mean to actually follow that with it, Okay. So I looked for a fake news, icon or image on the internet, and I found this one. And I think a lot of us would agree with there's a lot of fake news comes from these, but I thought, fake news, there's another source of fake news. And so I created this one. wouldn't you agree that we get a lot of fake news here too? I included Fox News because Fox News promotes this stuff too, you know? I didn't put it in my slides today, but just yesterday they were promoting this thing about how these scientists discovered that this type of great ape, or orangutan, the grunts it uses. Oh, did you see that? I mean, evolution is so dumb. I'm sorry. It's just crazy. So we're going to talk a little bit about, how this fake news happens. Here's something from my son's college. He's a sophomore now at CSU, and he shared this with me. This was this year, this last fall semester. It's his Pol Sci class, and she gives him things that she wants to do for the paper they're supposed to write. But look on this note on sources. Here's the authoritative sources that you're allowed to use. New York Times, BBC, Al Jazeera. Can you believe Al Jazeera? PBS. And then on the sources they're not allowed to use, they throw in MSNBC to make it seem good, and then they throw in Fox News, things like that. What scares me about fake news, and maybe you've been thinking the same thing, we're in a spiritual war. They're going to try to steer things, like Facebook has hired liberal fact checkers. They're going to try to steer the news towards their worldview. And Christian news sites, Christian websites, you're going to bet that they're going to try to call that fake news, but we really know what fake news is. Here's a great example of fake news. Do you remember when this story came out about, they found this smoking gun evidence for the inflation theory? Inflation is one of those rescue devices for evolutionists, and we'll talk about that more later. They have a lot of rescue devices. So anyways, you had all these, the New York Times, ABC Science, Space Magazine. This is all fake news. And what's interesting about this, well, first of all, let's just show what happened here. They found out what? A couple months later, they realized, this is not what they said it was. The Harvard team failed to use dust data compiled by Planck satellite, which had mapped the sky at many more frequencies. So they admitted that this wasn't the smoking gun they thought. But it's interesting, when they reported it, look at what we have here, the number of shares. 19,000 shares on Facebook. When they realized it might just be space dust, when they realized the mistake, look how many shares they got. 125. National Geographic, when they reported on this again, fake news here, Big Bang smoking gun confirms early universe's exponential growth. Confirms it. 25,000 likes. Now here's their report on when the thing crumbled. Look how many likes, 51. This reminded me of this verse, enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go in by it. And difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it. So I always like to remind people why this is so important. And this comes from a book Ken Ham did with another individual, and it was a sample of these a lot of them are Christian conservative schools. And almost 75% said that during middle and high school is when they really began to question the contents of the Bible. It was a very in-depth study. If you don't believe, when did you first have doubts? Ask that question again. 83% said during middle school and high school. That's when we're losing them. We're not losing them at college that much. They've already been lost. Which of these make you question the Bible the most? Notice the biggest answer, almost 30%, is this thing about Earth not being 10,000 years old. And this is, again, a lot of these were questions to kids that attended Christian schools and Sunday school. What's interesting about Sunday school, do you believe that God used evolution to create human beings? More who attended Sunday school agreed with that than didn't. Same with this question, do you believe that God used evolution to change one kind of animal into another? Same thing. So the point really is, an old Answers in Genesis slide, that our kids are being taught and brainwashed all week long at school, when they turn on the TV, they go to the museum in Denver. They're just constantly being inundated with this fake news. Think Drudge Report, Fox News, they report all this stuff too. So it really is important, and I got this, Lou is the first one who ever did this slide, and Lou's great to see Lou here. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. So this is such a critically important topic. I wish we could just get more, people and pastors to realize it. So here's some of the common evolutionist arguments I want to cover here today. I broke them down in these categories. Spitballs are illegal in baseball. So evolutionists, they use some arguments that are just flat out, they're either equivocating or they're just flat out lying. So I put those in the spitball category, they're cheating. Softballs are things like dinosaurs. That really has become a softball that we should be able to hit out of the park every time. Same with carbon dating, I'll explain why in the fossil record. Then I'll cover a couple of ones that are a little bit more difficult to answer, but there's solid answers for them. There's some fastballs, but we'll do a Hank Aaron on them. Okay, so this is the one that irritates me probably more than anything. In the forum I run on my website, if you bring this up once, you're warned. This argument, if you bring it up again, you're banned. There's plenty of sites on the internet people can go to and waste people's time. Because what they do is they'll say, evolution has changed, evolution is solved. That proves it right there because, small-scale change means it's large-scale change and the debate's over. And then you get creationists who will argue that, and it'll be a long thread, and it wastes everybody's time. That's the number one rule at evolutionfairytale.com forum. If you make that argument, you get warned once. If you make it again, you're gone. So, limited variation. We all agree that that's true, and we all know that the large-scale change from lizards to birds, dinosaurs to birds, we know that that's baloney, that's a religion. So we should be able to easily answer that one by pointing out, when you give me a newspaper report that says some lizard on some island developed different paths because of evolution, you can ask them the question, is the lizard still a lizard, and then explain that we all agree with small-scale change, not large-scale change. I've had this in my slides for a while. I remember when this first came out. Study cast doubt on creationism. I'm glad that they had at least admitted that there was that they had to cast doubt on it. There must not have been doubt before. So, this is all based on the change in the shape of the St. Bernard's head. And they say that they examined skulls of St. Bernard's spanning 120 years, and they noticed that they changed. And they say, well, we get our baloney detector out, evolution and natural selection is what did it. But what's interesting is they admit that they provided the animal with no physical advantage, and they have evolved purely through selective considerations of breeders. That's not evolution. So this is a ruse, it's a spitball. That's fake news. Okay, here's another one. This is kind of funny. We reported this on the radio show. Scientists discover organism that hasn't evolved in more than 2 billion years, so no change. That's no surprise to us. What's funny is the researchers say that organisms' lack of evolution actually supports Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. The lack of evolution supports evolution. This is how desperate they're getting. Can you believe that? So again, fake news. And here's a little bit more of what he said. These microorganisms are well adapted to their simple, very stable physical and biological environment. If they were in an environment that did not change, but they nevertheless evolved, that would be bad. That would have shown that our understanding of Darwin evolution was seriously flawed. So he went on to say the findings therefore provide further scientific proof of Darwin's work. Unbelievable. It fits perfectly with his ideas. Is there any way to falsify that theory? So Dr. John Sanford has a great book called Genetic Entropy and the Mystery of the Genome, and the point of this picture is the princess and the pea that she won't be able to detect and feel the pea on, covered by a bunch of mattresses. Well, that's real similar to natural selection, right? Because natural selection can only select individuals. It can't find the gene that changed or the mutation. It can only select an entire individual. So what's interesting is there was this conference. We heard this from our friend Walter Riemeid that we interviewed a couple years ago. They had this Altenberg 16 conference of 16 evolutionary scientists. They don't report this in the media, but they got together because they know that there's huge problems with natural selection. There's too much it doesn't explain. They also said a wave of scientists now question natural selection's role. So they know that it doesn't have the creative power that they're teaching our kids and claiming that it has. If you think about mutations, they're like the national debt. They keep increasing. So if you get a beneficial mutation, how would you ever detect it? maybe a good analogy would be the impact of a beneficial mutation on the genome is akin to cutting $1 from Brock Osweiler's $72 million Houston contract. Would it be detectable if you took $1 from his contract? Okay. Interesting, so Science Magazine reported that Templeton Grant funds Evolution Rethink. This was reported just in April 2016. And then there's a website, A Scientific Descent from Darwinism. Visit it today. The list keeps growing, and there's a list of a lot of scientists from a lot of the major universities. And this is their statement of belief. We are skeptical of claims for the ability of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life. Careful examination of the evidence for Darwinian theory should be encouraged. Good news is we are making headroads, and we, keep up the fight. Here's another spitball that's pretty annoying, and I'm sure you've heard this one. 98%. I was thinking about this the other day. You hear that a lot. 98% climate scientists, believe in global warming. 98% similarity between human and chimps, 98% scientists believe in evolution. It's like they don't want to say 99% and sound like they're exaggerating. They don't want to be too low. They want to really make it sound like they've got a ton of evidence. So that's just a thought of mine. But anyways, we were at the Smithsonian a couple years ago, and I remember my wife's like, don't go through that section. I'm like, I got to go through. So here this was there 2 years ago, 98.8 genetically similar between chimps and humans. So let's take a look at that. So Jeffrey Tompkins is a scientist. He was the director of, he was at Clemson. I'm sure he's pretty happy about the national championship game. And he was the director of their genome project of the faculty there at Clemson for like 5 years. So he really knows his stuff. And this is what he said when he actually looked at the data. He said the chimp genome is 10 to 12% larger than the human genome. Right there, if they're both functional, you have 10 to 12% difference. Now, if you had a user manual for something, some device, and then you get a new user manual and it has 10% more pages and it's useful information, that's a 10% difference. Now, if those 10 pages or that extra chunk of pages at the end of the user document are all blank, then yeah, that'd be a fair argument. You don't have to count that. But if it's functional, you have to. And we found out that most of the DNA, in fact, all of it is functional. He also noted that the chimp genome is still really just a rough draft, and he has observed extremely large blocks of dissimilarity, which exist on a number of key chromosomes, especially the male Y chromosome, which we'll talk here in a minute. So he plotted this graph, and when he actually did the study and he looked at all the sequences, he could at best come up with 88% similarity. Now that's devastating for evolution. In fact, 98% turned out mathematically it was devastating to evolution. A lot of people don't know that, but this makes it that much worse. So let me give you an illustration. So the male Y chromosome, if you think about just chromosomes in general, anything in the genome, 600,000 years ago, Adam and Eve, the first generation, they would have had a clean genome, right? No genetic load, no mutations. And over time, things got worse. So you could build up more mutations, you build up what's called a genetic load. So unlike the others, the male Y chromosome doesn't change very much. It's very robust. It's very conserved. There's a lot of function and very hard to mutate. If you do, a lot of times a baby doesn't survive. So the Y chromosome is very robust. Now, there are some changes in it, so there is ways to track lineages with Y chromosome, but it's very robust. So evolution, Bill Nye claims he can make predictions. Evolution makes predictions. Well, this was an ideal way to make a prediction. Since we're supposed to be related to chimps, that's what we would expect. But as maybe some of you have heard in the news, we've actually found out that the chimp Y chromosome is what one scientist said, horrendously different. Is horrendous a scientific term? We get a lot of those from the evolutionists. They use totally unscientific terms because they're not happy with what they're seeing. Here's what the scientist said that led the team, Dr. David Page. He said that in journal Nature that the human and chimp Y chromosomes are horrendously different from each other. How different? Between 30 and 47% different. He said the difference in the gene content in chimpanzee and human is more comparable to the difference in autosomal gene content in chicken and human. So this is something I mentioned earlier, that even if it was 98% different, there was a huge math problem for evolution. The mutation rate, if we were 97 to 98% different, would have been about 3 per person harmful mutation rate. That was calculated by evolutionists comparing human to chimp DNA. The required offspring would have been 40 per breeding couple just to break even. So if you use 95% similarity, which is still way too high, evolutionists admit they can't get it higher than 95% now. They admit that when they include the fact that more and more of the chimp and human DNA are actually functional. The best they can do now is 95%, if you read the latest literature. At that rate, the harmful mutation rate would be 9 per person. Each breeding couple would have to have 16,000 kids before they had one that wasn't deteriorating, that could evolve. This is part of Haldane's dilemma, just a segment of it, but math was never a friend of evolution. So here's another one. 98% of scientists are evolutionists. We know that's not true, but that still gets tossed around. You still hear that on the news. And the Pew Research Center is where they get this data from. They reference Pew Research Center. Well, look what they say here. 98% of the scientists, their survey was based on surveying scientists at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Do you know that Pew Research also polled them about how many are conservative and liberal? 6% were conservative. Who is that organization, AAAS? They put out Science Magazine. Do you think that's a conservative magazine? Do you think they're not gonna draw a ton of conservative scientists? So they tweeted this out. 98% of scientists believe humans evolved over time, compared with 65% of the public. I mean, by a totally biased sample. They're sampling scientists that are already admittedly liberal. So that, for sure, is fake news. Another publication, a physics publication, was referenced this old Newsweek magazine article that claimed that only 700 scientists exist in the United States. They're the credible scientists that support creation. Well, that number sure looked familiar to us, because as webmaster of the Creation Research Society, they have 700 advanced degree scientists. A guy at NSCE, National Science Center for Education, admitted, as far as he knows, he agreed, they probably got that number from the Creation Research Society website. So their evidence for only 700 scientists is by going to just one site. So Bob and I had a lot of fun on one of our radio shows. In fact, it was my brother's favorite. He got a kick out of it. So we went through the list of people who would disagree with that. So nobody doubts Darwin except for these guys. 100 PhDs listed at australiascreation.com, 200 scientists with master's degrees or PhDs at AIG, 300 medical doctors at Physicians and Surgeons for Scientific Integrity, 500 PhD scientists at the Korean Association of Creation Research, 700 advanced degree scientists at CRS, Creation Research Society, 900 scientists who signed their opposition at dissentfromdarwin.org. That number is actually higher now. 3,000 scientists and professors as named online by Dr. Jerry Bergman. We've had him here before. 30,000 U.S. public high school biology teachers do not endorse Darwinism in class. 100,000 college professors in the U.S. alone who, according to Harvard researchers, agree that intelligent design is a serious scientific alternative to the Darwinian theory of evolution. And finally, 570,000, over half a million medical doctors in the U.S. say God brought about or directly created humans. So it's not quite that 98% number that they want us to believe. So now we've talked a lot about dinosaurs. We've covered it a lot on the radio show and a lot here at RMCF. So I'll go through a few slides. It is a softball now. It should be for us because the evidence is so overwhelming, and it's a great witnessing tool. The evolutionists have long used dinosaurs as their way to witness to to get people not to believe the Bible and believe dinosaurs are millions of years old. This has become such a great weapon for us now. You know, I've talked to people at work. I remember one guy that was shocked when I showed him, these pictures like this one here. when we've actually now discovered, soft tissue in dinosaur bones. Totally blew them away. It's a very good witnessing tool because there's still a lot of people who don't know about this really discovery of the century. Really the greatest discovery, I think, for creationists in the last 100 years. Mary Schweitzer is the evolutionist scientist who discovered it. Discover magazine referred to it as her dangerous discovery. Again, not a very scientific term, but it's attacking their worldview. It's interesting, that title also said she erased a line between past and present. I've been posting this slides since I saw this on Wikipedia. I'd say it's been, 7 years maybe. So I went there again today to see if they've corrected it, and they haven't. I don't know if they ever will. So one of the arguments they use against dinosaurs, being only 6,000 years old or younger, is lack of DNA in fossils. So they say, based on science, that it would take around 100,000 years for all the DNA in a sample to decay to undetectable levels. So they make the prediction that we shouldn't find DNA in dinosaurs less than 6,000 years old. That's what they're saying here. So hey, we can show you that evolution is true, or that dinosaurs are millions of years old. However, from the journal Bone in January 2013, these data are the first to support preservation of multiple proteins and to present multiple lines of evidence for material consistent with DNA in dinosaurs. They have found DNA in dinosaurs. But who knows if they'll ever update their page. We have the evidence. Are they going to admit now that they were wrong and dinosaurs aren't millions of years old? Probably not. And they're certainly not taking this page down as evidence. They claim that we've been shown to be mistaken. They continue, they push this stuff. It's funny. Who knows how long this will be on the website, on the web. So we like to make predictions as much as we can at Real Science Radio. And one of them we made was dinosaur soft tissue will be found not only in rare circumstances, but rather easily when looked for. Confirmed in 2015, the journal Nature Communications reported original tissue in 6 of 8 dinosaur bones investigated. Preservation is more common than previously thought. The other prediction we made was that original dinosaur and other biological tissue will be found largely independent of the claimed age of the fossil. So it doesn't matter where you find it. If you find it in 8 million-year-old supposed rock or a billion-year-old rock, it doesn't matter. You will find this soft tissue because we know that the rock isn't that old. Reconfirmed in June 2016, the journal Nature Communications reported original biological material in gunflint chert allegedly from 1.88 billion years ago. So our evidence for dinosaurs and man living together and dinosaurs being millions of years old, it just isn't true. This is overwhelming evidence for finding soft tissue, unfossilized bones. What about carbon dating? So, when my son went up to CSU last year as a freshman, he was surprised a little bit that so many of the people he met were shocked that somebody doesn't believe in evolution. They were really surprised. I mean, that's how bad the brainwashing is. Well, one of the arguments he heard a lot is, well, what about carbon dating? Carbon dating proves that the Earth is millions of years old. Well, right away, we can tell them, well, no, you can't use carbon dating for anything that old. I like what this scientist said, Robert E. Lee, not the general. While the method cannot be counted on to give good, unequivocal results, the numbers do impress people and save them the trouble of thinking excessively. It sounds impressive. So from Real Science Radio, if you go to www.rsr.org/carbon14, Bob's done a great job of a long list of things where we find carbon-14 everywhere. So what's the point of this? So carbon-14 only has a half-life of, 5,700 roughly years. So after a half-life, after 5,700 years, half of carbon turns into nitrogen. So half of it's gone. And eventually, the most you could probably get, you can maybe date something up to 50,000 years, maybe. But after that, your carbon should be pretty much undetectable. It should be gone. So why are we finding carbon-14 and all these things are telling us are millions and millions of years old? There should be no carbon-14 in it. But we always find carbon-14. We find it in petrified wood, coal, oil, limestone, graphite, natural gas, marble, deep groundwater, dinosaur fossils, and last but not least, diamonds, which is very hard substance. Scientists are real careful when you take diamonds out of the earth and they find carbon-14 in them. It doesn't matter. They always find carbon-14. There's no way that diamond is millions of years old. If it was, the carbon-14 would have long ago turned into nitrogen. It's a very good argument for creationists and evolutionists and kids who have been gullible, taught about carbon dating. They don't realize it's actually backfires on them. It's a great evidence for creation. The fossil record has really always been a friend of creationists, but you always hear about, oh, the fossil record supports evolution. So again, my son gets that a lot. I've heard that a lot. And then you ask him, well, what fossils are you referring to? A lot of times they don't know, and when they do know, they'll mention Lucy or Tiktaalik, and we'll talk about those in a second. Here's what this evolutionist said. A major problem in proving the theory has been the fossil record. This record has never revealed traces of Darwin's hypothetical intermediate variance. Instead, species appear and disappear abruptly, and this anomaly has fueled the creationist argument that each species was created by God. So from that debate from Bill Nye, he said, we never ever find a higher animal mixed with the lower run. Well, that's not true. We find them all the time. For example, according to this doctor at this museum in eastern Utah, we find mammals in almost all of our dinosaur dig sites. That's not supposed to happen. They find duck in dinosaur rock. You know, dinosaurs were supposed to evolve into birds. They found a Mesozoic squirrel. They found a dinosaur-eating mammal in China. And then another from creation.com, to the surprise of many, ducks, squirrels, platypus, beaver-like, and badger-like creatures have all been found in dinosaur-era rock layers, along with bees, cockroaches, frogs, and pine trees. So the fossil record does not support evolution. But what happens a lot is they'll give you one or two examples that are famous, like this one, Lucy. And here, this was on Fox News. Fall from a tree may have killed human ancestor Lucy. So even though there's tons of evidence about her not being a human ancestor, Lucy's still a favorite. You still hear about Lucy. So we know that's fake news. Here's what the discoverer of Lucy said. With these credentials, I had managed to get some funding for my first expedition as a co-leader. I knew, though, that I had to prove myself by finding some hominids or the money would dry up. Kind of a motive there. What does the evidence really show? Lucy had a stooped gait, did not habitually walk upright. She had curved fingers and toes, a knuckle walker, lived in trees. And one famous evolutionist who really hated this whole thing about pushing Lucy, Lord Zuckerman, said they're just bloody apes. He was being honest. In fact, he said that the worst science you can find in the field of science, the worst discipline, is anthropology. He hated it because he's like, they're not scientists. Was Lucy a bonobo? You can go to the bonobo website, and they admit on that website, well, they claim that, which is true, physically their anatomy most closely resembles Australopithecus, or Lucy. And if you look at the two skulls, they're identical. Either Lucy is an extinct bonobo or just a bonobo that's in the fossil record. But, you know, evolutionists like to turn these things into human ancestors. And Lucy is in the mini museum still. This example in St. Louis Museum, they gave her human feet. That's brainwashing. Professor Betsy Schumann, an evolutionist expert, admits that the statue's feet probably are not accurate, but when asked whether the statue should be changed, she says, absolutely not. In other words, evolution must use bad science to deceive people. Hey, who's all heard of Tiktaalik? That has become more of a favorite now, so you need to be prepared with that one. With the slightly more informed evolutionists, they'll raise this. So we'll talk about that. So this is from the New York Times science section, and they reported the long-sought missing link. You know, evolutionists will tell you, well, we've already found lots of missing links, and then when they find one, they'll admit, well, we finally found one. So, fake news. We're going to talk about that. Not that long after that, what they found was 10 million years older, footprints that were 10 million years older than the oldest Tiktaalik. So in other words, tetrapods are 10 million years, allegedly, older than Tiktaalik, yet they're supposed to have evolved from Tiktaalik. It was a serious problem, and here's what this paleontologist evolutionist admitted. These results force us to reconsider our whole picture of the transition from fish to land animals. So Tiktaalik has been disproven, but it'll still be pushed as a transitional. This is from a college textbook that I had, and this guy, Douglas Fukuyama, he's a very popular author for college textbooks. And this is what his textbook said. The evolutionary origin of this highly modified order of mammals is becoming increasingly well documented. You know, this whole thing of mammals evolving into whales, that's becoming their favorite transition. So we'll definitely go through that. On that very same page, he said, among the important recent discoveries is Pakicetus, known from a skull found in a ravine. Wow. What he doesn't show you in that book is this is really all they found. 2 pieces of a skull. And RSR has a great list. Again, great job, Bob, for putting that together. It's really cool. You ought to go. There's lots of really good material here. What millions of evolutionists believe regarding whale fossils is based on fabricated and fully falsified information. So let me see if I can start this. I'm not sure if that, let me see if I can get that to start. This is just a 2-minute clip. Oh, I don't think you're going to be able to hear this. Do we have any sound bill or shout? I'll just skip this.
Had a whale fluke, but there were no fossils of the tail to confirm this.
Okay.
Dr. Phil Gingrich, the scientist responsible for the discovery and reconstruction of Rhodocedus, was questioned how he knew there was a whale fluke on Rhodocedus, since that part of the fossil was missing.
What was the reasoning that scientists think there was a fluke on Rhodocedus based on the other pieces of anatomy?
Well, I told you we don't have the tail in Rhodocedus, so we don't know for sure whether it had a ball vertebra indicating a fluke or not. So I speculated it might have had a fluke.
Scientist Gingrich also acknowledged that the flippers were drawn on the diagram without these fossils. Now, he does not believe this animal had flippers. Again, his answer was surprising, since the museum diagrams had flippers on Rhodocedus.
Now, since then, we've found the forelimbs, the hands, and the front arm, the arms, in other words, of Rhodocedus. And we understand that it doesn't have the kind of arms that can be spread out like flippers are on a whale. And if you don't have flippers, I don't think you can have a fluke tail and really powered swimming. And so I now doubt that Rhodocedus would have had a fluke tail.
Many experts consider whales to be the best fossil evidence for evolution, but are unaware of these discrepancies.
The Grand Experiment is a really good resource. Okay, let's see if I can get this back on. So what'd you think of that? That's amazing. Okay. So bear with me 1 second. I've never used this type of mic before. There, how's that? Does that work? You can hear me? All right. Okay, so whale wars. I mean, these scientists really can't make up their minds. They argue whether the whales evolved from hyenas, cats, deer, wolves. Hippos is one of the later ones that they're arguing for. Okay, this is what Dr. Carl Werner said. Now, he's got great material on this, and I think maybe we even have some in the downstairs. The 2 scientists who found the lion's share of walking whale fossils essentially created the best fossil proof of evolution using plaster models and drawings, and supplied these to museums and science magazines. And that includes one of the guys you just saw in that video, and you can see more of those videos on the website. Whenever a fossil part was missing, they substituted a whale body part, blowholes, fins, and flukes on the skeletal model or skull that they distributed to museums. When these same scientists later found fossils negating their original interpretations, like we just saw in that video, they did not recall the plaster models or drawings. Now museums are full of skulls and skeletons of walking whales that are simply false, just like they're full of Lucy and all these other false, human ancestors. Okay, so now we're going to look at some of a little bit more sophisticated evolutionist arguments and how to refute them. And this one I think is really cool. This picture has creationists terrified. Ooh. But it's fake news. So what is this referring to? It's this claim that chromosome 2 fusion event occurred in the past. Now, the reason they do this is because grade 8s have 24 pairs of chromosomes, and of course, humans have 23, so they have to come up with a solution for that. Well, they came up with something by selectively choosing evidence that not only allowed them to make the claim that 24 turned to 23, they also said they found proof of this that would establish evolution as true, that we would have a common ancestor. So their evidence was a correspondence of chromosome 2 to two ape chromosomes. Near identical DNA sequence is what they claim. So they say, well, we got the human chromosome 2, and we got the great ape chromosome. We got two of them. They call them like 2A and 2B, two separate chromosomes. They were near identical, they claim. They didn't even have full sequences, by the way, of the ape chromosome. The presence of a vestigial centromere and the presence of a vestigial telomere. I'll explain that here in a second in the next slide. So what they claim is these two chromosomes, at some point in the past, in this ape-like creature, fused so that human chromosome 2 is the leftover of two ape chromosomes. The center of a chromosome is called the centromere. So they would expect that we would find these leftover centromeres that are disabled. Because if you got a chromosome with 2, that's really bad. It's very harmful, if not fatal. So they wanted to find something that kind of looked like, and they can say, well, it got enough mutations to disable it, and now we have a healthy chromosome. So the other thing they claimed is, well, let's see if we find leftover vestigial telomeres, the ends of the chromosomes. So those are the ends that they wind down little by little as we get older. It's kind of what brings about aging. So they claim, oh, we'll find evidence in the middle of this chromosome of this fusion event, and it'll be turned off. It'll be, look like an old telomere and pretty much useless. It'll be functionless. That's what they claim they found. So that one, when you first hear it, when I first heard it, first of all, I know that, there's so much overwhelming evidence to evolution, but I couldn't answer it the first time I heard it, so I had to research it. And we didn't have a lot of the genetic information at the time. So the argument that I used back then was, well, you're assuming that that whole thing is really not functional. Well, going back to Jeffrey Tompkins, the scientist from Clemson University who now works for ICR, he did a thorough study of the part of the genome where this vestigial telomere was alleged to be. And this is what he discovered. It's a fully functional gene that sits right where they claimed this fusion event occurred. That alone totally, completely ends the argument. It refutes their claim. But in addition, he found there's things called binding sites in our DNA, and it's where, in the transcription process, the RNA can bind to different sites and regulate what the gene does. It's like a switch. Maybe you turn the dial up and you create more of the protein. Maybe you turn it off completely. That's how a binding site works. So it's like a switch, a binding switch. You found 3 of them in this gene alone. One of those binding sites was exactly in the location where this alleged telomere was. Not only is it a fully functional gene, it has a switch. This is a very complex and very critical and important gene right in the site of that telomere. It totally refutes their argument. Here's what he concluded. Functional genes do not arise by the mythical fusing of telomeres. The alleged fusion site is not a degenerate fusion sequence, but is, and since creation, has been a functional feature in an important gene. That one's been totally refuted. So here's another one that evolutionists use a lot. Again, the more sophisticated one. You're not going to hear this from the high school kid who's in college and he's been brainwashed in evolution. You're going to hear this from the evolutionary spokesperson type people, the ones who really dig into it, and they like this one. The New York Times reported this. Of course, that's fake news. Let's talk about this one and what they're saying. So Kenneth Miller is a famous evolutionist, and he used this argument quite a bit. And so did Francis Collins, by the way, who's a Christian, but he's a theistic evolutionist. So he used this analogy. So he's a professor, and he uses plagiarism detection software. My sister does the same thing because you get people who cheat. And they've got this software that does a good job of comparing papers to things on the internet and to other students in the class. So it's a thing to look in both for people cheating with each other or cheating with things on the internet. So he gave this analogy. I ran your papers, he accused a couple students of plagiarism, and he said, I ran your papers through a program that looks for unusual matching strings. You guys misspelled the same 6 words in the same 6 ways, and when you have matching mistakes, there's no other explanation other than a common ancestor for the paper. So, what he did was, the claim is this, that you have a broken pseudogene, a gene that used to be functional and something disabled it. It's near a good gene, and so it doesn't get selected out of the genome, but it's broken, and there's a mutation in it. So the logic goes is if you've got 2 animals, or excuse me, a chimp. By the way, that really is a smoking chimp. Found that on the internet. And of course, PETA is really mad about that. So a chimp and a human, if they have the same broken pseudogene and they've got a mistake in the same place, that's not a bad argument for a common ancestor. Okay? So this one was, if you know about how evolution, their claims and how they work, this one was easy to refute when I first saw it, but that's because I'm used to, I know what to, but for the layperson, it may not be obvious at first, but I'd like to know, does anybody see where this could be wrong? I mean, what would be, maybe I'll give you kind of a clue. What's an assumption that they're making? Why is this not a good argument? Anybody want to take a crack? Why is a shared mistake in a non-functioning gene not a valid argument? What's the assumption they're making?
Fair for me to guess. They're assuming that what they think is broke is actually broke. It's probably not broke. It's probably important.
Cheater. Pseudogenes, are they junk or functional DNA? So they were making the assumption that this was a broken gene. It's not anything that's part of the genome that actually provides a useful function. If it provided a useful function, then they can't use the argument of a shared mistake. It's not a mistake. So this paper, I pulled this up from 2003. They've known about this for a long time. Pseudogenes that have been suitably investigated often exhibit functional roles. It totally destroys this argument. From Yale Medicine, the junk DNA, rest in peace, junk DNA. We know that it's not junk anymore. This is part of the reason why evolutionists are trying to come up with another idea for evolution, because neo-Darwinism is dead. They know it, but they're going to keep pushing it because it's a religion. I honestly was thinking, I was in the shower and I thought, junk DNA is just like dark matter. It's a rescue device. And then I found this. They actually said dark matter. Junk, bare, non-functioning dark matter. That is a really good analogy, because they use dark matter to try to explain all the missing mass in the universe. So they created something that there's no evidence for. Just like junk DNA, they assumed the DNA, a lot of the DNA was junk, and now we know really none of it's junk. So this is the last one. This is from a Christian who's a theistic evolutionist, and he wrote on his blog that his favorite argument against young Earth creationists is distant starlight. Now, this, to me, has always been the most difficult one for creationists to answer, because there's not really a slam dunk answer. I personally don't like any of the explanations you get from the creation scientists. We've had some here that suggest it's a time zone thing. That's not been accepted. Russ Humphreys has a real popular idea with black holes and using Einstein's theory. I've never liked that idea because it appeals really to an old universe. What I do when I get this argument, well, before I go to the next slide, let me just say, one of the things we talked about on Real Science Radio is how God stretched the heavens. And so I'm encouraging Bob. Bob has done a lot more research on this than I have. He's written some work on this and to submit a paper and hopefully get it published. And I'm not going to get into details, but it's the stretching out of the heavens. It's the stretching of light from the stars when God created the universe, analogous to maybe on day 3 when he created the plants, and the plants were pulled out of the ground. I don't think Adam and Eve were created as young babies and then grew rapidly. They were created themselves, probably, an adult. So God could have easily, like he says in the Bible many times, it's like he really wants us to understand the concept of stretching the heavens. So there's hopefully we get something, Bob gets something published on that. I think that's a really neat idea. I think it explains a lot, and I'm not doing it justice. There's a lot more details to it. But what I do when I get this argument, the way you deal with this, the way I deal with it, is I quickly point out to them that they have a worse speed of light problem, and it's called the horizon problem. And it's the problem with the standard model of the Big Bang. And what the problem is this, is imagine this is the Big Bang and this is the universe. The time it would take for light to get, say, in just that small piece of A right here, 300,000 years, the universe is billions of years wider and older. How can light travel the entire universe? So imagine a universe like this big, and then light can only go that far, yet the universe is the same temperature everywhere. It's a serious problem for them. It's called the horizon problem. They tried to solve it with that inflation model, where they claim, after the Big Bang, there was this huge expansion, and then things went like this, and they use a balloon as an example. The evidence for that has always been very questioned. A lot of scientists that are evolutionists and atheists don't like that theory. CosmologyStatement.org has a ton of scientists who have signed it saying we need to come up with another idea. It's not scientific. The inflation theory is a rescue device, just like junk DNA was a rescue device for the genome. It's not real. So they have a serious problem, and they have to appeal to something that there's no evidence for. They thought they found the evidence, and it turned out they were measuring space dust. Not a good argument. And then I like to dovetail it into one of my favorite arguments now that we covered on the show, and it's really neat how this whole thing happened. And it's funny, these scientists, they discovered hot and cold spots in the cosmic background radiation, and they weren't distributed randomly as you would expect. They were aligned on what they called the axis of evil. Is that a scientific term? It threatens their worldview. What did they find? If you consider the elliptic plane, the different temperatures on either side, the differential in temperatures on either side was different. And it was consistently different. And it goes right through our solar system, right through the axis of the Earth. It's amazing. And what the whole history behind this is really neat. So here's what this scientist said in 2013. What is intriguing even further is why such anisotropies, which is temperature differences, should lie about a great circle decided purely by the orientation of the Earth's rotational axis and or the axis of its revolution around the sun. So when this whole thing first started in 2009, they were saying, well, this is measurement errors and whatnot, and the Planck satellite is going to rescue us. 2009. This disaster, is that a scientific term? This disaster might be averted if we can show that the axis arises from some oddity in the way our telescopes and satellites observe the radiation. The European Space Agency's recently launched Planck Space Telescope might settle the issue when it makes the most sensitive maps yet of the cosmic background radiation. Until then, the axis of evil continues to terrorize us. These are people who just hate God. I wish they'd. I had a friend on Facebook, a college fraternity brother in my college. I asked him. He's an evolutionist. And he posted something on my Facebook page. And we got in a big debate about slavery in the Bible. And then not that long ago, he posted something about the Big Bang or something. And we had a small debate again. And at the very end, I said, the evidence for this is so overwhelming. Why don't you just do the right thing and admit you hate God, that this is actually true? He did that. He said, you're right. I really think this is probably good evidence, and I just hate God. At least be honest. I mean, not that I like that he does that, but, hopefully, down the road, plants enough of a seed that he comes around. I mean, be honest. It's a religious belief that you have. You hate God. Here's what happened in 2013. They actually got their data back from the Planck satellite. The fact that Planck has made such a significant detection of these anomalies erases any doubts about their reality. It can no longer be said that they are artifacts of the measurements. They are real, and we have to look for a credible explanation. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight. From Psalms 9, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. The axis of evil, that's really fascinating thing they've discovered. So, Bob has put together a fantastic video, and we're going to have this downstairs, evidence against the Big Bang. A lot of this stuff is covered in this video. It's very well produced, lots of neat slides and animations, everything it's great. So this will be available downstairs. Highly encourage it. So God's evidence for creation. What is God's evidence for creation? Romans 1:18-20. The creation itself. His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. We like to say it's like shooting fish in a barrel at Real Science Radio. It's so much cool stuff in creation that God has done. It's great engineering. You get tons of scientists that are trying to reverse engineer that stuff to make better products. The ultimate engineer. The evidence for creation is what he's created. And this is such a true answers in Genesis slide. If we need to be attacking the foundation of what supports the worldview of evolutionists and the fruits of that worldview, which is they use it to justify abortion, everything, gay marriage, murder, racism, euthanasia. And of course, our foundation, if you believe in a literal Genesis, is these attributes that we have. One man for one woman, mercy, loving God, sanctity of life, love thy neighbor. So defending the Bible, for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for pulling down strongholds, casting down arguments, and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations, and you shall be called the repairer of the breach. So it really is important to defend the foundation. So finally, I wanted to mention that Mike Riddle is going to be at a creation group that will meet at Peace Lutheran on February 2nd. Oh, Judy, I forgot the name of the website. DenverSocietyOfCreation.org. Go there and you'll get details on this meeting. Mike Riddle will also be giving a creation training class on February 4th, 2 days later, from 8:30 to 5:30 p.m., and you can sign up at the website just mentioned by Judy. So Mike Riddle, I've heard him before. I've heard him a couple of times. He's one of AIG's sanctioned speakers. He's excellent, very good speaker. World-class athlete, by the way, if you didn't know that. He's a national champion in track and field, and a champion. He's a real interesting guy. He's real fun to talk to, great guy. If you can make that, I'd highly encourage it. You won't be disappointed. So he's in the Creation Science Hall of Fame. You know, we have another Hall of Fame guy here. John Elway? No, wait a minute. No, Bob Inyart. He's also in the Creation. So anyways, that wraps it up. Thank you very much. And so, question, yes? Yeah, they want you to come up to the microphone. Is there a... that is, I'm sorry, we'll say it again one more time. Denver Society of Creation, Denver Society of Creation, Denver Society of Creation, Denver Society of Creation.org. I'm doing that for myself. Denver Society of Creation.org. You're welcome. Bill, do you have a mic you wanted? Is it? Oh, this is it here. Okay. So if you have any questions, feel free to come up to the mic. And just as a reminder, again, we'll have this, but plus some other really neat videos downstairs. The hydroplate video is really, really cool, too.
Does anybody have a question? Can you hear me? Okay, thank you.
Would you please explain what dark matter is and how the evolutionists are using it?
Okay, I will make my best attempt, but it's unfortunate Ed's not here because he would give a better answer. But the universe has, and I think based on gravity, and Bill, you maybe help too, but dark matter is the fact that there's a ton of missing mass in the universe. They don't understand why they don't have the amount of mass that they'd expect based on their cosmological model. So they solve it by saying, well, there's this dark matter, we haven't detected it yet. They're trying to find dark matter, but they have not detected it. So that's a very layman's answer, but that's the best one I can get. If anybody wants to take a shot at that one, if you want any more details, I know we got scientists here who could, but that's the gist of it.
The origin of the theory of dark matter was based on the velocity profile of the spiral galaxies. The spiral galaxies have a velocity profile that is not consistent with millions and millions of years of evolution. But that should be our answer to the challenge. Well, let me explain why they came up with this in the first place. The velocity profile in the spiral galaxies is one where at the remote edges of the galaxy, the velocity should be totally different than what it is near the center. And there's an exponential relationship if you assume that system of stars is in equilibrium, that it's so old that all the mutual gravitation of all those stars is coming into equilibrium, and we should have this exponentially decaying velocity profile. But what God did was, to confound the wise, was he gave all those stars a different velocity. And what they look like they're a pinwheel. In other words, they look like a rigid body motion. If you took a cardboard model of the galaxy and spun it, it would look like what we call rigid body motion, correct? Well, that's what they're doing. And it means that they haven't been there long enough for this exponential curve to develop. So our answer to dark matter proves they're young. Mm-hmm. They haven't been up there long enough to establish this profile. That's what I think we should answer that question with.
And also the winding arms, the whole problem with the arms of these galaxies, no matter how far out the Hubble telescope looks at these galaxies, they still have these winding arms. But because of Newton's laws, these old ones should have been wound up like a clock screw and be totally featureless. So it's like all these young galaxies are near the start of the alleged Big Bang. They do not have, has anyone heard the spiral arms argument? It's the winding up problem. In fact, the first time I ever met Bob Inyart was that debate you guys had with the guys up at CU, and one of them was a couple of those guys are scientists, and one of them I think was a physicist, and he did not have an answer for the winding up problem. Why are spiral galaxies, why are their arms still in a spiral and not featureless? They should be featureless if they're millions of years old. Yeah. But so thank you, Bill. I hope that helped. And you can look it up. I mean, I did do a little bit of research on that. Again, mine's from a layman's approach, but the generic answer is there's a ton of missing mass in the universe.
Well, I have a question. The one I get the most, which I'd appreciate hearing how you and Bob respond, is the claim that a universal DNA code within all living things is powerful evidence for a common ancestor. How would you respond?
Well, so a universal code, that, as an engineer, the fact that the DNA is a single, that we have one code that's used in all of life, that points to one creator. It doesn't point to multiple gods. If you had life forms based off of something different, like, I don't know, silicon, Rockman from Star Wars or something, or Star Trek, that would be evidence for two different creators. The fact that we have a DNA, a language, a coding language, that's one language. We don't have a C language and a C++ and a Fortran, or we can really date myself, Python, Java. Now I'm back in the future. If we had that, we would think that would be an argument for more than one creator. That would be my response to that, personally. Bob, did you have a different take on that?
Fred, you touched on this, but what are some of the best arguments against dinosaur to bird evolution?
Okay, so if somebody presented me with that, first of all, I'd inundate them again with the whole dinosaur thing, because so many of them don't even know that dinosaurs, they were finding unfossilized bones. So after I got that out of the way, I said, oh yeah, but still, dinosaurs evolving into birds. If that is true, why is it so easy to find an evolutionist scientist, guys who are experts in birds? They are the most sought-after experts in birds. This guy from North Carolina, Alan Freducia, the guy who, he was the head of the Smithsonian Institute, they all claim that that's bunk. If it's so compelling, why can I so easily find an evolutionist who says, no, that's not true? That would be the first way I'd say it. So if you believe that, how come it's easy for me to find guys on your own side who say that's totally bogus argument? The other thing is, and you can get a little bit more, a little bit more technical on, you're going from the DNA morph from bones to hollow bones that birds have. There's so many vast differences. And to say that that happens by natural selection and mistakes, that's what evolution is, it's mistakes. So somehow mistakes are going to pile up, and at the right time you're going to hit a beneficial mutation that's somehow going to make that next step into evolving this thing into a bird, and you're going to get these hollow bones and whatnot. It's just, it really flies in the face of sound logic, but that's how I'd personally attack it. I'm not saying that'd be the best way, but and anybody else, if you have your favorite way of refuting it, that would be my take.
Fred, I appreciate your talking about fake news today, because I heard that California, of course, leads in education for the public schools. Whatever California decides kind of gets pushed through around the rest of the country. And today I heard that there are 2 bills in the California legislature. AB, which stands for Assembly Bill, AB 155, and SB, which is Senate Bill 135, both of which deal with teaching about recognizing fake news in the public schools. I have a feeling there's going to be a little bias to that.
Oh, absolutely.
Not in our favor.
Oh, exactly. It's like my son's paper, Oh, you have to use the New York Times and Al Jazeera. They're the ones that came up with that clown stuff about Manning and drugs and stuff. Amazing.
So Fred, thank you so much. And you used about 10 quotes that you've been holding back because they all need to go on our website. But when you said that the chimp genome is about 11% larger than the human genome, we're going to have to record that, because on our website right now at rsr.org/genomes, we have a question: why don't science articles say how long the chimp genome is? They never say it. Every time you'd expect they would, like they do for every other species, they don't say how long the chimp genome is, and that could very well be because then it would be obvious to people that it's not 98% the same as the human genome.
Yeah.
So thank you for finding that. That's
well,
awesome.
That's great. That's a great point. Yeah. Wow. They don't mention that. You think about it, and they do mention the lengths of other ones. Oh, this worm has 5 times the length of the human. All these different lengths. That's a great point. So, yeah, that thing about in schools pushing evolution and this and that. My advice is, if you don't want your kids involved in getting in, this sex culture and this and that, don't send them to a porn shop. If you don't want your kids being indoctrinated against God, don't send them to public schools, because they are being indoctrinated and all that. And if your kids are in college like mine, one of mine is now, and I know Bob's, you have a couple in college now, or just 1, 2? Yep, couple, okay. You're having to deal with these kids who've been brainwashed this whole time, and a lot of them, we saw the numbers of why they don't believe in the Bible. Why would you send your kids to a place that they're getting inundated in this? You won't send them to the porn shop because of obvious reasons. Don't send them to public schools. That'd be my encouragement, that you really consider that if you are sending them to public schools. Any other questions? And if not, I thank you very much. Again, downstairs, you're going to encourage you to take a look at the Big Bang video. And Bob has a great video on the hydroplate, and that thing keeps getting more and more cool. At some point, there's going to be some more graphics coming out that I've already seen some previews. That's super cool, Bob, by the way.
Let's give
Thanks.
Fred a big hand. Thank you, Fred. What I love about it, you got all that good technical data, but you still make it entertaining, so I appreciate it.